Welcome to the Life Friendly Business Podcast. Are you a female solopreneur juggling the demands of business and life, wondering how to make it all work without burning out? You love your business, but the overwhelm, the endless to-do list, and constant juggling makes you question whether it's worth the toll on your life. Here's the truth. You don't have to choose between a thriving business and a life you love. I'm Erin Thomas Wong, the Life Friendly Business Mentor, and this podcast is a guide to building your own life-friendly business, one that aligns with your values, works on your terms, and supports your well-being. If you're ready to step out of the daily grind, reclaim your time, and create a business that fuels your purpose while giving you the freedom to live life on your terms, this podcast is for you. Hello and welcome to the Life Friendly Business Podcast. I'm Erin Thomas Wong, and today I'm joined by Ellie Bowie, who is a brand designer, and she's going to be sharing her unique approach to branding and also a little bit more about her business journey. So lovely to have you here today, Ellie.
Hi Erin, thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here.
You're welcome. Would you like to explain a little bit more about what you do and your approach to branding?
So I'm a brand identity designer, which means I design your logo and then everything around that. So I'll pick your typefaces, your colours, icons, anything that builds the visual brand. And as part of that process, we'll also look at things like photography styles, illustration, tone of voice. We touch upon the whole sort of package, if you like, how to present your business. My approach, I take quite a deep thinking approach. I think it's really important to define before you design. So I work with clients on a sort of a big phase of strategic thinking at the start. So if whatever the brief is, we will start from really exploring their business, getting to know them, who they are, what they're about, what their background is, and where their business is going. And we'll explore all the kind of marketing proposition type stuff, which with small businesses, they may or may not have done this work. But even if they have, it's an opportunity to really explore it from a brand perspective and think about who those customers are and what they need, what they're expecting from that brand, how they want it to make them feel, and whether they're quite often, if you have something existing, we'll look at, are you positioned in a way that people see you in that way at the moment? Do your current customers see that? Or is there a gap there? Is there something we need to do to push this business into its next phase? Maybe they're changing direction, or maybe they're just aware that they're not being perceived in the way that they would like. A big part of that is me listening to the client and just questioning, and it's quite a fluid process. And then I'll go off and explore and research and sort of really dig into everything we've talked about and try and pull all the disparate threads together. So quite often there's really what appears like small things to the client or irrelevant things, but actually they all shape how that business operates. You know, people's values are usually quite embedded in a small business. That whilst, you know, it all sounds quite dry talking about values, it informs the decisions that people make, and that is part of who the business is and who business is going to attract and the people they want to talk to. So it's pulling all of those things in and understanding how important each element is. You know, for some businesses, values is like right up there. That's the most important thing, and that's got to be communicated. But there's lots of businesses where those values are a big part of what they do, but they're not necessarily front and center. They're not a purpose-driven organisation, but that doesn't mean they don't care about the environment or how they do business. So it's drawing out all the different facets, and I tend to start really wide, and we use that process to distill right down. So before we've even started any of the design process, we've distilled down and understood really what that business is about and what it needs to do, how its customers need it to feel. And then we start to look at how do you communicate that visually. So it's kind of a process of distilling right down and then broadening right out as we create the visual process.
I love the fact that you said, you know, your brand is about how you make people feel, because it's so easy to just assume that branding is just about having a logo and having, you know, set colors that you use. But, you know, what you're saying is that it's so much more complex than that. And this, you know, your brand is really going to impact how your message is received.
Well, exactly. And I quite often recommend to people, you know, work on your messaging, working on all those other things before you invest in a brand, because until you know those things, till you really understand who your business is talking to and what it's offering to people and what they value from it, it becomes very difficult to develop a brand that's really going to connect with your customers. That's not to say you don't need something visual, but the logo and all of those bigger parts, it's very easy to jump into that without understanding what you're trying to achieve. And that means from a design perspective, you can create something and it can look great, but it doesn't mean it's quite right. And there's a lot of subtleties in that of why something really connects with their customers and why it maybe just feels a bit off.
So what kind of businesses do you work with? Like what size businesses?
I tend to work with small businesses. It tends to be 1 to 2 founders, and they're usually service businesses. And my preference, what I really get passionate about, is working with businesses who are just hold their values dear and are just sort of gently rebellious, just trying to nudge the world into a better place. So it's not necessarily purpose-driven organisations. It's businesses like mine who, people who share my values, who want to do things more sustainably, who want to do things with a moral compass within it, who want to market ethically. And those, all those strands, they're all important in that brand visual of communicating what you're about and whether you're about, every business has to make a profit. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's where you sit on that line and what you thought. And that also tells the story of how you do your work. I worked with a property developer a couple of years ago, and his ethos was about building homes that last. And that feels quite radical in the current environment. And that's not to say it was a radical, rebellious kind of brand, but there's something different, and it's different for a purpose rather than for a marketing tactic or a reason to sell. It's driven by why the business is set up, and a passion for doing what you do really well. And I have huge respect for those kinds of businesses, and I really want to support anybody that sort of is doing good things in the world, really.
I love that. And I love the fact that you're able to use your skills and your expertise to, like you say, get those people who want to make a positive impact out to more people in the world, because, it is such a busy world that we're living in and so much information overwhelm. So would you say that, having a really solid brand would help your business stand out from all the others?
Absolutely, as if it's really truly connected to you. So what makes you stand out is being really true to yourself and what you stand for. When you bring in all those values, you bring in all the things that, all quite often talk to people who maybe set up their business later in life and that wasn't their first career, and they feel like they need to downplay what they've done before. But actually, all that experience, all that life experience is blended into what you do and how you do it and why you do it in a certain way. And that's what makes you unique. Like, we are, it's a cliche, but we are all totally unique. We'll all do things differently. Every designer will come up with a different concept, which is why it's important to find the person aligned to you. When you sum that up in a visual identity and the way that your messaging is put out there, and the whole tone visually and written and photographically and all those things combined, they will build something that is an existence of you. And that's what will make you stand out. And whether you're a quiet, nourishing soul who's doing these beautiful yoga retreats, your brand needs to feel like that. It needs to feel like, oh my God, this person's giving me a hug. You'll communicate all of those things. Whereas when you're doing something really bold and exciting and fast paced, you need to get that across. And those two things, I think what's really key is understanding that your brand doesn't have to be what else is going on in the world. It's not what you see on Pinterest. There's a plethora of design out there and you don't see the context. And that's not to say the design isn't good, but when you see it out of context, you don't know what it's actually trying to achieve. So you can't evaluate it in the same way. So in order to create something unique, it's got to be true to everything you're trying to say. And when you do that, it will feel like it makes sense to people and it will feel authentic. And again, we're in a world where being real is increasingly like a scarcity, I think, not only through AI, but people's desire to get seen. All the marketing tactics small businesses are bombarded with, that you're kind of pulled and swayed and you're not always doing things in the way that maybe is true to you. So it's sort of pulling back and being really sure of what it is you want to get out there.
I totally get the whole thing about being pulled in different directions, especially when you're comparing yourself to other businesses like in your industry or in the marketplace. But yeah, that being true to yourself and your own values, which I do just want to say, because I think there might be some people listening thinking, feeling quite a pressure to, I need to have this all figured out. I need to know what my core message is. And it took me years to get to the point that I am today. And I think, for me, it was launching the podcast and rebranding at the same time that actually made me. I was able to really pin down what my core messages were. So for people listening that are thinking, oh my God, it sounds amazing and I really want a brand like that, but I'm not in that place yet, what can they do to start kind of exploring what they're really about, what those values are that they want to come across in their brand?
I think that the main thing I'd say to people is don't panic. Whilst we all want a brand that's amazing and distinctive and driving all sales, it does take time to get to that, as you say, because it's about figuring the business out. And when you start out, even in a business like mine, where you don't have loads of different things that you offer, it's really hard to figure out. And I generally work with businesses sort of 2 to 3 years in at least, who are ready to invest in branding because they've been through that process and they've experimented and they've tried different things and they've tried different tactics and they've tried different services and product, and they're really starting to get to know not only what sells but what they enjoy and what matters. And sometimes you find businesses and they say, well, I do this whatever service, but I don't know, it sells really well, but I don't really enjoy it. Actually, I want to be doing something slightly different. And so again, it's about getting that positioning right. So just take your time, concentrate on understanding your business. It's really about thinking about who it's for and what they need. Using empathy is probably the simplest tool. But also, don't panic. I would say if you're creating a brand yourself, it always makes me a little bit sad when people say, oh, don't judge it, I created it myself. We're all creative. People make incredible brands who aren't trained designers. So just be confident in what you're doing and be consistent. So if you're putting anything out there, decide on a color palette. Think about whether you want to be loud or quiet. Think about whether you want people to feel that you're warm. I mean, not many people want to feel, you think people don't want you to feel cold, but if you're going sort of for a luxury, high-end thing, it is slightly more aloof. It's not warm and cozy and nurturing and friendly. It's a higher status. So, and what's easier quite often to do is think about what you're not. I'm definitely not this and I'm definitely not that. And then a tool I use quite often to define a brand is, it's fun, but not silly. It's exciting, but it's not daring. It's giving yourself parameters, and it's a really useful way of sort of working out where you are on a scale. I mean, you sometimes see these things online, what kind of scale you here or here, but I find using words to, keep digging into the words that you use to describe yourself and keep rewriting them and keep going until it feels right. And it does take a really long time. I mean, I've just rebranded my business and I can plot it back. It's taken me about a year, that entire process. And that's not the design process. That was really quick. That was right at the end. But the thinking process of where I want to take the business, how I'm going to do that, what does that look like, how I'm going to articulate that, how is that? It didn't radically change my services, but it did shift them all ever so slightly. And it's these really small shifts that bring you clarity, that make it really simple then. And I know it's much easier said than done.
So how have you found, the fact that obviously your expertise is in brand design, that's your zone of genius, but not necessarily trained in running a business. So how have you found that combination of doing what is totally in your zone and running it as a business, self-employed?
It's a journey. That's always a good way to describe it, isn't it? It wasn't a path I thought about and deliberately chose. I started freelancing and I would freelance in-house at studios, which was an amazing couple of years because you see a totally different, you get such quick experience of seeing an insight in how different studios run. And then I had my children and you suddenly realise you've got to work in a totally different way. So in a sense, I was kind of forced into taking on all my own client. Although I did my own client work before that, it wasn't the main source of income in my business. So that was a really big shift. alongside small children, it's really tough. No business background. I couldn't access any support. So I just kind of went for it. And I think probably what helped is when you've got no idea, you just rely on your instincts. And what I've noticed, the more the explosion of knowledge on the internet, and there's courses for it, everything, it becomes really overwhelming, and it makes you less likely to trust your instincts on things. And that's not to say that I know how to run a business brilliantly, or I was doing it brilliantly, but I was doing things in a way that felt okay to me. So it's really challenging. I think one of the hardest things running a creative business is you're doing it because you love it, which means you tend to overwork. And people quite happily let you overwork, and people don't value, not all people, but in general, creative work isn't valued as highly as it could be. And I think it's hard for people to see the amount of work that goes into it, which is probably one of the reasons I talk about how much thinking goes into what they do. It's not, I don't just sit down and create something out of nowhere. Nobody does. Well, that's not, people do, but even if you sat down and you created it, it's what's in your head from years of experience, the things you've already thought about, the work you've done previously, any other creative things, the things you've absorbed, the things you observe, all of that feeds into what you're able to output. So it's kind of naive to assume things just come out of nowhere.
And how do you balance putting boundaries in place for yourself so that you can run a life-friendly business and trying to keep your clients happy?
It's definitely something I had to learn. And I would say that, the majority of the learning for me was I had to learn. Clients aren't generally that pushy. I mean, I think when your branding is right, what you're putting out there, you attract the right clients and you don't have those kind of issues generally. I work within the school day, which is hard, but I also could see the benefits. Actually, my brain is done by 3 o'clock because I work really intensely, and then I stop and then I go and do funnish stuff with my kids. But it forces you to work in a different way, and I think that's actually been a really healthy shift for me, because it also gives time for your brain to switch gear. I'm walking to go up to the school and I'm thinking and I'm percolating thoughts. So, you need those times. It does give you different rhythms. And I also take the summer off, which I'm absolutely committed to doing forever now. Because again, I'm definitely not, it's definitely busy in the summer. I've got 2 young children, but the ability to stop client work and that's, I have to plan that carefully financially, obviously, and you have to plan and let people know. And sometimes I do miss out on projects, but on the whole, people are generally, if they want to work with you, it's only really 6 weeks. And actually I could just be busy with other clients, but I'm very upfront about when I work, because I think it's really important for people to have rest and those boundaries. And I think we don't talk about it enough, in that the culture is so always on. And I find it amazing going back to work in September is incredible. Like, my brain is on fire. I have the ideas and the things that have just been mulling over it in the summer, and I'll try and read, and I'll be thinking about business and trying to do creative things, but not anything specific. And that's the beauty. That's what your brain needs. It needs that time to noodle, to daydream, to think about other things in order to restore you. So whilst it is really tough, I think it gives you really valuable lessons, and it makes you way more productive. It really does, because you have to get things done and you have to think about your priorities in a different way. If you've got a whole day from 9 to 5, you can't work intensely all that time. You just don't have the energy.
Yeah, I think the whole school holidays thing was a massive journey for me as well, because I think, when the kids first start school, you're really fighting against it. It's like, not another school holiday, and it's like, really, it's frustrating and irritating and limiting. But actually, when you start leaning into it, it's like, okay, actually, and you realize that just like the kids, we get to a point where we really need the change of pace, and it's actually very healthy for us to have that. And absolutely, for me, one of my measures of success is the fact that I don't really work during the holidays. And I was just I was blocking out my call diary today for the summer holidays, and it's actually 52 days, which feels like a long time. But I know that what that means is, unless there's any kind of emergencies, I won't be speaking to any clients on calls during that time. But obviously I work online, so I'll be dipping in and out. I might be doing the creative things, the blue sky thinking kind of moments. But having that space, like you say, allows me to, rejuvenate and be much more creative. And so I think having those school holidays throughout the year, actually, if we lean into that, we can really, make it a benefit to us.
Certainly. And I think when I'm struggling, if I watch my children, it's a really good reminder. Like, they know how to be creative and they know what they need. They know when they need to run around, and the world isn't necessarily facilitating that. It's almost crushes that. And the joy of running your own business is that you get to decide. You're still within society's parameters, but you get to decide how you run that and how you use your energy. And it's made such a difference working with my own energy levels, when obviously you continue with client work, but the other things I want to work on in my business, things I want to write, things I want to create, going with the flow. And when it comes to me, it makes life so much easier. And knowing when I need to take a break and that it's not working and I need to step back and I need a rest. It's phenomenal. I love proving it to myself every September. Like, it's just amazing. And also, that I don't think we talk about enough about getting outside and movement and all these other things. These are the things that feed your creativity, and every business needs creativity, needs creative thinking. It's a really valuable asset.
And everything you've just talked about there is, for me, that's about self-leadership, recognizing what you need in order to be at your best. I want to pick back up on, you said if you are getting your message across in like an aligned way, in the right way, that you'll attract the right clients. And that's really interesting, isn't it? Because I think so many of us might feel like we have to take whatever work comes our way and have really nasty people sometimes that we're dealing with, or really political situations. But so how have you managed to get your message out there to attract the right clients for your brand design?
I mean, I think the core way I've always got work is through recommendation. So I think being true to yourself in the way that you work is the first step. But obviously that is quite a small window of people. So finding my voice has really been finding what I really want to talk about. I think I found that hard for a long time. I'm not a great fan of social media for all the usual reasons, but really thinking about my process and sort of digging into, what is this business going to be? What do I want it to be in 5-10 years time? How do I want to position myself? That really unlocked, well, if I want to be that, if I want people to come to me, these kinds of people to come to me, how am I going to get that? I've got to put that out there. And it's really, really hard. When you make your career a business, you don't necessarily think about coming on a podcast or writing blog articles or any number of things you have to do. But when you dig into who you are and you feel confident about that and you articulate that in your messaging and your brand, then it becomes so much easier. Everything flows. You know what you want to talk about because you've figured out what those unique things are. And then you can figure out what those content pillars are, which is something you've helped me with in the visibility challenge, is what are the most important things you want to talk about and what matters to other people. And I think for a long time, the things that mattered to me, I didn't think that would necessarily matter to my clients. They might do, but they might not. And it's having the confidence to step into the things that really matter to you and realizing that there's so many people out there. You will find the right people, and trusting in that, which is really hard, definitely.
Especially when you have an idea in your head of what you think you should be doing or how you think you should be showing up. And I know that that's a block for so many, thinking, I have to, if I'm going to do this, right, I need to show up in this way, but that doesn't feel like me. So, how do we lean in and feel comfortable showing up authentically? I know it's a bit of an overused word, but that's what we need to get comfortable with being, isn't it?
Totally. And to take it to a brand example, quite often you have people, I design websites for people, and if you ask, have you got any photography, have you got some photographs of yourself, and there's some people find that really difficult, and they either have had a photo shoot but they don't like any of the images, or they haven't and they don't want to, which is absolutely fine, and you can build around that. But then it's part of that is understanding, okay, if you don't want your face out there, but then what is it about you that we communicate? And you can do that. I work with a client who is a copywriter, but she's a quieter, introverted person. She didn't want to be front and center of her brand, and it wouldn't have made sense for her to have her face, because that's not the experience you're going to get when you work with her. So understanding that and being, understanding where your energy is and what you enjoy can then filter into everything you do and how you approach it. So if you don't want your face everywhere, you don't have to do that, but you can. We talked about having some really long shots with her in the background on the beach, for example. So you can get that human touch in without having to be front and centre. And by getting that wide shot, you get that sense of space and calm, which is one of the key things we picked out when we talked about her brand. So and on a personal level, it's just digging into what do I enjoy and what really drains my energy. And sometimes that isn't what you think. Sometimes it's fear talking. I don't like social media, so I'm not going to put myself out there on there. And whilst for me, there is an element of truth to that, there was also that fear of putting yourself out there, that fear of being judged, which is hard to overcome, but it's surprisingly easy the more you do it. And you realise that there are lots of trolls out there, but they're not really looking at small business owners on the whole, I think. And just being true to yourself doesn't mean that you're necessarily controversial. Having your own perspective on something isn't going to, cause shock tactics. You don't have to use shock tactics or any of those kinds of things. It just means that there is that authenticity. You're right. It's unfortunately overused, but it's really true of how do you present yourself online in a way that is you. And I think it's listening into what feels comfortable for you. I really enjoy writing, and that's where I'm leaning into creating content, because that's my comfortable place of doing it. And so then it's thinking about where to put that, and like blogging and LinkedIn are kind of key for me. And then I feel like I'm trying to attract people who want to read stuff and think about stuff. So that it naturally fits with everything I'm about. If you love being on video, then great, go for it. And you'll attract the people that love that format. So it's just being aware, which is the hardest thing, and taking the time to think about what you're doing and reviewing and just feeling your way through things more than listening to all. Yeah, there's tons of amazing advice out there, but thinking about the advice you need, not the advice you're just being bombarded with.
And in the visibility commitment, we talk a lot about being intentional with what you're putting out there, don't we? Because it can feel so overwhelming, feeling like I've just got to be everywhere. I've got to be putting these posts out. But like, what is your intention there? So what changes have you made since doing the visibility commitment?
I mean, it's been massive. I think it's a really powerful process because it's really made me think about why I thought I was being intentional, but I was intentionally avoiding things. So and I think that's where you've got a really powerful process of just gently nudging, like, are you sure? So I've started to write a lot more, and everything I want to do is not superficial and fast paced. So blogging, writing long form, having it on my website, and then using that on places like LinkedIn, a little bit on Instagram. I'm sort of still not sure how I feel about that, but I'm just, you have to run experiments, don't you? You have to sort of keep going and figure it out. But I think the biggest hurdle was just sharing honestly, really honestly. And that's not anything about my life. That's just sharing honestly about what I do, which shouldn't be hard, but it is incredibly hard. As a female business owner, you're in a world that conditions you to be small and quiet and not put yourself out there. So it does become hard. But there is a massive community of really supportive people out there. And when you realise that you get that support, that's really uplifting and really encouraging. And working with people in a group who support and encourage you just makes all the difference. And I think it's just getting into a rhythm. And, it is a snowball. It becomes quite exciting. There's days where I can't stop writing stuff, and I've got lots of thoughts I want to put out there.
That's so good. And yeah, it's about, like you say, leaning into what you actually enjoy and what lights you up, and moving away from the stuff that drains you, because, we don't need that in our lives. Even if we think that that's something we should be doing, like, we get to make those decisions, don't we? So how can people find out more about you and about working with you?
Best place to find me is on my website, which is eleanorbowie.co.uk. I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram. You can sign up for my newsletter, which is the Curiosity Club, which is intentionally every sort of 4 to 6 weeks, because I don't think I have enough to say to bombard you, but I want it to be quality thoughts and inspiration. And you'll also get my latest blogs on that. And you can also download, I've got a brand review guide that I've put together to help you if you've got an existing brand or something you've put together, or even if you're in the early stages. It's a set of questions to help you kind of work through and think about how your brand needs to feel. So it's a set of prompts just to support you in that process.
Fantastic. And I'll add that link to the show notes as well.
Thank you.
And finally, what tip would you give to small business owners listening?
Go easy on yourself. It's really hard. It's really hard. Take more rest and take more rest, take a walk and then see what comes out in your head. Listen to the voices in your head, the good voices in your head. But think about how things are feeling and just trust in yourself way more. You can seek advice. There's loads of amazing advice out there. But when you've thought about where you're going and what you need, then go and find the advice to support you in that and try and drown out the rest. Like, simplify things as much as you can.
What comes up for me there is creating space for yourself.
Yeah.
We really do need that space for our brains to process everything and percolate and all those things. So slow down.
Yeah, slow down and the ideas will come, definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure, Erin. Thanks for having me.